I would like to welcome everybody to today's episode of Under the Pine Tree with our special guest, Art Smith. Art is the apostle assigned to the Canadian mission. He's also assigned to the Caribbean, Mexico, and Texas field mission. As well, he also has a special assignment to the Indigenous people. So we're very happy to have our apostle starting off this week with our Under the Pine sessions. Now, before we get started, I would like to remind people that this session will be recorded. So if you do not want to have your image recorded and showing up at any time during this video that will be made, please mute or turn off your camera by clicking on the little icon at the bottom left of your screen, such a little red line that goes through it that tells you that your camera is turned off. And without any further ado, I am going to turn the whole episode over to Art Smith. So Art, take it away.
Thank you, Scott. Hello, everyone. Oh, hello, David. Nice to see everybody. Oh, hello, Gary.
I saw Gary and Deb there. Yay!
It does feel a little bit like it's under the pine tree at Noronto. I haven't actually gotten to be under the pine tree at Noronto since 2016, and so it's this is close. I was hoping to make it up there in real life this year, and I know probably several of you were. So I'm curious, how many are regular Noronto people? I know Gary and Kathy and David, and let's see, and I don't know about Anne. I'm not sure if I've met Anne before. Gosh, maybe I just don't recognize you, Anne, on little tiny window. I'm sorry.
Lou is.
And Lou, of course, is. And Susan, are you a regular Noronto person? No. And Dennis and Dorothy probably are usually down more Ziontario way than Noronto. But anyway, it's nice to see all of you here today for our virtual Under the Pine Tree afternoon. So when David and I started kicking around possible topics back, a little while ago, we somehow settled on thinking that it might be interesting just to kind of talk a little bit about Haiti and the Community of Christ in Haiti. So one of the places that I get to serve in the church, I've kind of been connected with Haiti, I guess, really going back to about, well, in some ways I've been connected to Haiti since I was a little kid in Ottawa, and we used to take weekend trips up to Montreal to visit the congregation there. Martin Turnan, who was our youth leader, used to organize outings for us to kind of expand our worldview a little bit. And so my first connection, I guess, with the church in Haiti was as a teenager visiting the Haitian expat congregation in Montreal. Then in 2004, I was assigned, after having lived in Tahiti for a few years for the church, I ended up assigned to the Latin America Caribbean field. And at that point, the Latin America Caribbean field included kind of everything south of the US border, all out into the Caribbean, Mexico, Central and South America. And I was involved in leadership development, putting some classes and training together. And so that brought me into Haiti a few times, and I started getting to know the church there and the staff there. But then in 2016, I became the apostle responsible for the church in Haiti. And by that time, that meant being responsible for 2 mission centers that we have in Haiti. And anyway, so we thought that it would be fun just to hear a little bit about, for you to hear a little bit about what the church in Haiti is like. Kathy, are you waving at me? I see you waving, or you're just waving. Okay, good. So Haiti is a really interesting place, and it is a place with a wonderful people, and it's a poor country, and probably a lot of people who have heard about Haiti maybe think of it as being a poor country, and that's certainly true. Haiti usually tops the list of the poorest countries in the Americas. Haiti was a rich country, and in fact, it was known as the jewel of the Caribbean. They were rich because of slaves and free labor, and they were rich because of sugar. And so the French, the Europeans, were making a lot of money off of Haiti, and Haiti was seen as a very wealthy, prosperous place. Then in 1791, and in fact we're coming up on the anniversary here. Every year in Haiti they celebrate the 22nd of August. 22nd of August 1791 was the beginning of the slave rebellion and the overthrow of the colonial powers in Haiti. And you can read about that. In fact, if you go to Wikipedia, there's some really good articles on the history of Haiti. But you'll read about Toussaint Louverture, and he was an ex-slave. He became kind of the most charismatic leader in the Haitian rebellion. And as you travel around Haiti, you'll see his statue in different places. In fact, even before you see his statue, if you fly into Port-au-Prince, you'll fly into the Toussaint Louverture Airport. And that's named after this leader of the slave rebellion. Started in 1791, about 200,000 Haitians died in the rebellion. But by 1804, Haiti emerged as the first free Black nation. And they were really, they had so much promise. But by 1825, France, which had lost the jewel of the Caribbean, France forced Haiti to pay 150 million gold francs in reparation to the French ex-slaveholders who had lost their property because of the slave rebellion. And that obligation to pay France back crippled Haiti economically. And in fact, they didn't completely finish paying off this debt until 1947. And many people would say that Haiti today is still very much impacted by not only by the era of slavery, but then the era of reparations that they had to pay. So sometimes it makes me laugh a little bit, because in the United States, they talk about, every now and then they argue about maybe whether there should be some kind of reparations paid to former slaves or to descendants of former slaves. But in Haiti, the former slaves had to pay reparations to the people who lost their property, which were the Haitian slaves. Anyway, in spite of all of these challenges, for much of its history, Haiti has been a fairly prosperous nation. In fact, for years and years, the two countries that emerged on the island, the Dominican Republic, the more Spanish-speaking side of the island of Hispaniola, and then Haiti, the more French-speaking side, Haiti was probably the more prosperous of the two nations throughout much of their history, and was a leader on the island for a long time. But that has gradually changed, and today the Dominican Republic is seen as a much more stable economy. And if you go there, if you travel to both islands, there's really just no comparison between the wealth that you see on the Dominican Republic side. There's poverty there, of course, but they're better off than what they are on the the Haitian side of the island. And that's because of a number of things. Partly it's politics and some US intervention in Haitian politics, some kind of just sort of the luck of things has been part of that. These days, I was talking to someone in the airport in Port-au-Prince one time, a Haitian who was explaining to me some things about Haiti, and he was saying that Haiti, the two biggest challenges, the two biggest things against it that Haiti has is, one, its extreme poverty, and two, the fact that it's so very close to the United States. And that proximity to the United States, he was arguing, and others would argue, and the fact that it's top on the list of poor countries leads to a lot of people trying to help. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that are trying to help, that often means kind of sending a lot of money into the country, and there have been kind of cycles of dependency that have been created that are not necessarily healthy or good for the empowerment and the long-term development of Haiti. But anyway, it's a complicated topic, but Haiti continues to struggle with corruption and poverty and a complicated relationship with a lot of people who are trying to help. So speaking of the people who are trying to help, so Community of Christ has been in Haiti for about 50 years. So we celebrated actually last year the 50th anniversary of Community of Christ in Haiti. We've been there for quite a long time, and the Community of Christ, when we moved into Haiti, moved in at a time where the government was really trying to limit churches. There were a lot of churches that were interested in evangelizing Haiti, and the government was really trying to say at the time that they were not interested in just more evangelism coming to Haiti. So when we went into Haiti, Bud Sheehy can tell you the story about kind of all the negotiations to allow the church to be established there. And we had to agree as part of our charter in Haiti that we would not be there just for worshiping purposes, but that we would be there for human development purposes as well. And our charter talks about healthcare and about education. And we've done quite a bit in both of those things over the years. Especially in the early years, there were quite a few medical missions to Haiti, and lots of folks from the Community of Christ or the RLDS Medical Association went down and did a lot of work in Haiti. But over time, schools and education have emerged as really our chief social purpose in Haiti, in addition to kind of the worshiping congregations that we have there. So we currently have about 170 congregations in Haiti with easily 20,000 active participants. And our congregations are administered through two mission centers. There's Haiti Grand Nord and Haiti Grand Sud. So the Great North and the Great South mission centers. The mission center president for Haiti North Mission Center is a young man by the name of Laner Lefort. I say he's young because he's even younger than I am, so he must be very, very young. And then our mission center president for Haiti South Mission Center is a man by the name of Renel Louis Jean. And most of our churches in Haiti have a school that operates alongside. So if you go and visit a typical congregation, it's a church that meets on Sunday, and of course not just on Sunday, because only in a few countries does church mean a thing you do on Sunday. In Haiti, the church meets most evenings of the week, and then there are meetings during the day, during the week, and all sorts of things going on. But most of our churches have a school associated with them, and the school usually meets either in the same building. In some of the rural locations, all we might have would be just one very small, humble building, and the church would meet in there and the school would meet in there. In other places, the schools have their own building, sometimes even with multiple classrooms, either alongside or up above the church. So yes, most of our churches operate with a school alongside. We have a very significant, long-standing relationship with an organization called Outreach International. And Outreach International is kind of the US-based version of World Accord that many of you would know, of course, in Canada. And we've been partnered with Outreach International for a long time, especially for the work of the school program in Haiti. And so whereas pretty much every one of our 170 churches, most of them would have some kind of a school effort going on, 61 schools in Haiti are sponsored by this partnership with Outreach International. So they receive some funding from Outreach International for the teachers, and they've received just a little bit more support. So 61 schools are a little more serious kinds of operations. Of those 61 schools, 17 have nutrition programs. And so that means that the kids at those schools, Outreach and the church partner to sponsor nutrition programs where the kids get a good meal every day while they're there at school. And actually, if you contribute to Community of Christ World Mission Tides, in particular, if you've given over the years to the World Hunger Fund, the World Hunger Fund is really funds the church's portion of the money that supports the feeding program, the nutrition program in the schools. So thank you to all who have given to that program. And that program has actually done a little bit more here over the time of the pandemic, by the way. It's been an interesting time because schools have spent a lot of time closed, and just like in a lot of places, even with the school closed, the people still need to eat. So we've tried to keep the feeding program going and even expand the feeding program. And it's had to be translated into a different kind of program because usually they provide hot meals to the kids at school, and now they've tried to identify some of the most needy families and to provide them with just the raw materials to be able to prepare food at home. So let me just say a couple more things, and then I'll just try and leave some time for you to ask questions. Maybe a little bit about the kind of the church side of things in Haiti. I mean, it's all the church, understand. So when I talk about the schools and the church, and sometimes it's interesting as we have conversation with Outreach International, our partnership in Haiti is about as close a partnership as you can get. And even though here, Outreach International, they have their offices over there, and my office is over here, and we kind of manage things from slightly different perspectives. But when you get on the ground in Haiti, a lot of times the school is in the church building, and the teachers and the students and everybody, it's all very integrated. But talking a little bit more about the church side of things, the church journey in Haiti has been an interesting journey, and it's been really interesting and really challenging over the last number of years. And I would say the challenge has been in, among other things, one of the challenges has been finding the right balance for Community of Christ identity, message, mission, and beliefs in Haiti, in a Haitian context. When the church first went into Haiti, here was this foreign US church, and a lot of people wanted to join a US based church. And the church grew very rapidly from the beginning. And those missionaries who brought the church into Haiti, the last thing they wanted to do was to create kind of a cookie cutter US copy of, something that wouldn't really fit Haiti at all in Haiti. And so there was a lot of flexibility and a lot of freedom for how the church would kind of grow, and it grew very organically. There was also quite a bit of money back in those days, and so different kinds of systems developed. We built a lot of buildings in Haiti because there was a fund called the International Capital Fund, and those dollars helped to build chapels and schools and those kinds of things. And we had money even to pay pastors. So there was a national staff, but there was also there was quite a bit of money that was available for pastors to receive stipends, and then there was also quite a bit of money for kids to have their education sponsored and different things. There was more money. But we got to a place where we had probably about 300 congregations in Haiti. And going back here, a decade and a half ago or so, I would say we had about 300 congregations in Haiti. But what it meant to be a Community of Christ congregation or an RLDS congregation in Haiti at the time was interesting. The congregations, most of them would probably not be familiar at all with Community of Christ's additional scriptures. So they would know the Bible, but most of them would probably never have heard of the Book of Mormon and wouldn't know about the Doctrine and Covenants, or probably ever have seen any section of the Doctrine and Covenants. And they weren't really familiar with our, as we got into the age of enduring principles and then eventually mission initiatives, we continued to have most of the congregations would not have been familiar with those or really with our basic beliefs. And they didn't really recognize, a few key like national leaders, but mostly they would not recognize our priesthood structure either. In Haiti, there was kind of a generic evangelical Protestant priesthood leadership structure that most of our congregations just had, and but they would not have been familiar with kind of Community of Christ's understanding of Scripture, understanding of priesthood structure or priesthood calling. Some of the congregations would have probably had a few deaconesses, but for the most part, they did not ordain women in the Community of Christ congregations in Haiti either. And of course, they didn't sing our hymns because they didn't have our hymn book in Haitian Creole. They used kind of a generic Protestant evangelical hymn book that they sang, which of course was very appropriate. But some people would go to Haiti and kind of look at what they saw, and they might say, they're kind of Community of Christ in name only, except for the fact that many of the congregations probably wouldn't actually know or use the name of the church either. So it was an interesting place to be. And into that setting came Apostle Bunda Chibwe as the apostle for Haiti. He was the first time that we'd had an apostle in Haiti who was a native French speaker. And so the way things had gone for years was that mostly any training or classes that were presented to the core staff, and oftentimes through a translator. And at the end of those sessions, a lot of times basically what would happen is the the staff would kind of get together and say, and huddle, you know, after the missionaries had left, and they'd say, did any of that have anything to do with us? And they'd say, I don't think so. And then they went on, doing wonderful things, you know. But when Bunda got there as the field apostle, there started to just be kind of an interesting tension. And it was a difficult time because Community of Christ budgets were falling at the same time. And so many people blamed Bunda for kind of ruining the church, because he was the apostle who was there when we no longer could pay stipends to all of these pastors, and when money for new buildings pretty much dried up. And the national staff went from, at the peak, probably about a dozen people down to about 4 by the time Bunda's tenure as apostle was done. And so many people would kind of see Bunda as the cause of all of that. That would be an oversimplification of that. That Bunda was just happened to be the person around as those budgets were changing so much. But as Bunda was there, Bunda was able to go out and travel. First off, it was less dangerous for this Black African man to travel around Haiti in a time when things had been a little bit dodgy in terms of safety in Haiti. And so some of the white missionaries had been reluctant to travel around very much. So Bunda starts going out, and Bunda is out there in the congregations and teaching in French, which most of the time the preferred language is Creole, but a lot of people understand French. And so Bunda was able, especially for a lot of the younger people, was able to really connect with them. And one of my favorite stories is that Bunda was teaching in the Patientville congregation, which is one of our big congregations. It's been over the years kind of our headquarters church in Port-au-Prince. And Bunda was teaching there, and as the story goes, he was talking quite a bit about the Doctrine and Covenants. And one young man who was an assistant pastor in the congregation keeps giving him these quizzical looks, and finally puts his hand up and he says, this thing, Doctrine et Alliance, c'est quoi ça? What is that? What is that thing you keep talking about, Doctrine and Covenants? And so Bunda gives, you know, this explanation about the Doctrine and Covenants and about continuing revelation and how we handle these sections of the Doctrine and Covenants. And they kind of move on, and he teaches some more. And later in the class, this guy's hand goes up again, and he says, okay, so this thing, Doctrine and Covenants, can we get copies of that? Like, are we allowed to see that? And so, and of course, at that time, although we didn't have a lot of money for some of the things we had been trying to do better at some of our translated resources. And so we were able to follow up with sharing a lot more copies of the French Doctrine and Covenants that started to get spread around Haiti a little bit more. The thing is, about that time also, in the United States and in Canada, really first in Canada, then in the United States, there had been a lot of talk about homosexuality and the church. And so in a way, what was coming in Haiti was kind of a perfect storm of factors. So the reduction of budgets and the laying off of staff, the confusion about all this identity stuff that people had oftentimes never heard of before, and for some people was difficult to understand and a little bit scandalous. And then all this talk about homosexuality, that even though it was said that it wasn't going to directly impact Haiti because there was going to be no change in policy for Haiti, it was a topic that got a lot of attention. And so I would say, you know, we're still close to it and it's not over yet, but a major division was coming to the church in Haiti. And just to give a little bit of a snapshot of it, so a longtime leader and a fellow by the name of, and a friend, a fellow by the name of Michel Rosier. He had served in a number of different roles for years, but he was serving as the Mission Center financial officer for what then was just the one Haitian mission center. Michel would end up leaving the church. And interestingly, I always find it interesting, how people go, because Michel had been one of the most outspoken voices over the years against ever talking about the Book of Mormon. And so I find it fascinating that Michel ends up becoming allied with the restorationists who were looking for partners in Haiti. And so Michel ends up connecting with them and is now, so some of the restoration branches support some of the work that Renell has been doing, I think. We ended up losing quite a few of our congregations. I would say, like I mentioned, we probably had about 300 congregations at one point. Generally now, the local staff would catalog about 170, and we'll probably lose some more. I don't think the division and kind of the impact of some of that split is done yet. The young man in the Patientville congregation, the guy who'd raised his hand and said, "What is this Doctrine and Covenants? And can I get a copy of that?" His name is Renell Louis Jean. So he went on to be a Creole language translator for the church, and he translated the primary summary that we've got of Community of Christ message, mission, identity, message, mission, and beliefs, Sharing in Community of Christ. Some of you probably have seen that book, Sharing in Community of Christ. Oh, good. Well, he translated that version 3 into Haitian Creole. And that kind of made Renell the #1 chief expert in Haiti on Community of Christ identity. And he went on to then become the Haitian national president. He represents us kind of legally in Haiti as the national president, and to become the Community of Christ Mission Center president for Haiti South Mission Center. And I say, even though it's been a difficult time in Haiti and a sad time in some ways, I would say it's an exciting time for Community of Christ in Haiti. There is a whole new generation of folks who have now been exposed to Community of Christ identity, message, mission, and beliefs, and are trying to figure out what that means for them in Haiti. And I would say we're kind of renegotiating our relationship in Haiti, in a sense that I think we were primarily kind of a U.S. church sponsoring some evangelical Protestant churches in Haiti, and a lot of the relationship was based probably on money, and we're trying to get to a place where we're a little bit more based on shared identity and message and mission and beliefs, and there's less money involved, but it's been, I say, a difficult time, but it's also an exciting time. And the two young leaders, so Renell in the south and Lanier in the north, are really just on fire for Community of Christ identity. And it was interesting. It's become one of their traditions now. Whenever they have a big gathering, they'll have a competition, and especially the youth groups. So the youth from different congregations will send a team, and they do like a quiz bowl, kind of a reach for the top kind of a competition on Community of Christ, on Sharing in Community of Christ, and a few other things so they'll throw in, they need to know the material from the latest worship and sermon helps, and so they know about the lectionary, and they know about the kind of the the basic beliefs and enduring principles and mission initiatives. And those kids will compete, and they'll do like an afternoon competition, a little round robin tournament. And I'm telling you, there's no apostle in Community of Christ who has as much of sharing in Community of Christ memorized as those kids in Haiti do now. I was amazed the first time I was there and saw them doing this, and realized that not only did they know, the headings, the enduring principles, some of us have memorized the headings, but they have memorized the entire paragraphs, and they know every word of those books. So that is very interesting to see. I want to, actually, I was going to copy into the chat just a couple of links. Let's see if I can do this here. So yeah, so I've copied into the chat a couple of links. One of them is my YouTube channel, and if you go to my YouTube channel, you can, and if you scroll down past all the, so my What Day Is Today blogs are kind of all piled up at the top. You probably don't want to get into those. That's like a bottomless pit. But anyway, if you go back before them, you can get to just kind of my collection of some of the things that I posted on there over the years. I've been kind of I think I'm pretty much committed to YouTube now. So in the future, there'll probably be more things on YouTube. Unfortunately, for some years, some of my stuff was kind of more over on Facebook, and so I don't have quite as good a collection. But there's some good Haiti stuff on there is what I was trying to get to. And one of the most recent videos is a video of the street parade in Ange after this past March's Mission Center conference and church birthday celebration there in Ange. And I just recommend watching that. You can get a feel, or you can also watch lots and lots of Haitian choirs, and they're wonderful singers. If you speak French, there's some videos there. You can listen to Lanier kind of sharing with a group of pastors and kind of get a sense of how they talk about Community of Christ a little bit. But I really recommend watching the Street Parade video. One of the things over the last few years is we've introduced the Community of Christ Sings core repertoire in Haiti. And the kids love singing Kanisa Lita Jengwe from Africa, and some of the different songs. And so it's fun to hear them marching through the streets of Ange and singing songs from Community of Christ halfway around the world. So it's kind of fun. So you have now listened to me talk for a long time. I'm sorry. But I wanted to kind of just give a little bit of a background, and I may have almost told you everything I know, so I'm not sure if I have anything left to answer in questions, but we could try if you have any particular questions that I can answer. And I don't know.
You know me.
I don't know, Scott, if you, well, I mean, I can probably just, sure. Yeah, if you just unmute yourself and we'll juggle this somehow. So I see Anne
I'm the other
raising
end.
a finger.
Okay. Have you had how successful have the schools been? And what grade do they go to? And have you had any graduates to post-secondary? Because it sounds like the schools have been going for a while.
Crazy.
Yeah, so the schools have been going for a long time, and some of our schools are older and some of our schools are newer. There's a range. So some of the schools just do elementary education, and some of them would probably only do, maybe the first few years of elementary education. But then other ones go all the way through high school. So in one of our big schools is there in Patienville next to our headquarters church, another one out in Carrefour, and they go all the way through high school. And we have certainly had people who have gone on to post-secondary education. In fact, it's been fun. We've just been going through a process of restructuring the staff a little bit in Haiti. we had our longtime schools coordinator, fellow by the name of Augustin Dera. He passed away suddenly here late last year, and so we've been operating with our mission center leaders kind of as interim school coordinators, and we're just getting ready to do a little bit of hiring. And we're actually in partnership with Outreach International. We're going to we're splitting, and because we now have 2 mission centers, so we really wanted to have 2 school coordinators. We only had budget for 1 school coordinator, so we're sharing 2 positions. So we'll have a half-time mission center financial officer, half-time school coordinator in the south, and a half-time mission center financial officer, half-time school coordinator in the north. But it was interesting, several of the candidates who applied for those positions were graduates of our Bois Rentonner, which is the name of our schools in Haiti, our public schools, well, private schools, but I mean in terms of the up through high school. And then one of the requirements for these positions was that people had university or professional training. And so all the folks who not all the folks who applied, but several of the folks who applied for these positions had been on that pathway. And there are others who have gone on to become nurses and doctors and different kinds of professional kinds of things. So yeah, absolutely. So they're successful. I would say there's a range of situations, and part of that depends on the rural urban divide, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
Are these kids members of the church, or is this a community school? And the second part, how's the funding for the schools and the teachers, and how's that all work?
Yeah. So you don't have to be a member of Community of Christ to go to one of the schools. So the schools are operated in the community, and certainly some of the kids would also go to the Community of Christ Church, but not necessarily. And in some cases, it would probably be kind of an outreach thing, because the school is maybe there in the church building, or so some of the kids maybe do end up going to the church as well. Because of the way we operate the schools, I am not the most knowledgeable on the details of the school operation. So if we had Marcia Penrose or Andrea Reed from Outreach here, they could give you a little more solid information on the details of how all that works. But the outreach sponsorship provides some extra support for the teachers, for paying the teachers. And from time to time, there have been some projects for providing some different materials and things. But for large part, the schools are self-funded. So the kids that come to school pay a small inscription fee, and the schools, the schools operate in partnership between Outreach International and then their ability to self-fund. For the 61 schools that are in that Outreach International partnership, there are other schools, again, that would be just entirely independent and self-funded. So yeah, that's probably about, that's mostly what I can say about the schools without getting into, I'd have to pull up some budget sheets to look at. I can't even tell you just off the top of my head, how much the average teacher earns. I can say this, not much, not much, but anyway, they are, it's amazing how frugally people manage to live in Haiti. And yeah, so thank you for that question. Gary, I see you're unmuted. I don't know if you were gonna.
Me?
Yeah.
Are we still connected with the church in Montreal, Art?
Yeah. So that would be,
in church, right?
yes, so it is. So I was last there about, it's probably coming up on a year and a half ago now. And Carrie and I were able to go visit it. Unfortunately, the church in Montreal, sitting in the Canada East Mission Center, is, you know, out on the far edge of the mission center geographically. And as all of you know, no one congregation in Canada East Mission Center gets, you know, all that much individual attention from the mission center. And we could probably talk about that. But so it's a challenge. And I would say the church in Montreal probably now, they're in kind of an interesting place, because there's been a lot of effort in Haiti, like I say, to kind of, as the church there has worked to become kind of newly familiar with Community of Christ identity, message, mission, and beliefs. But the church that got planted in Montreal is a church that really came out of that, more of that old model of the church in Haiti. And so I think, you know, there's an opportunity there for us to spend some time and kind of re-explore what the place of the church in Montreal is in relation to the identity of the church, in relation to the kind of the polity of Community of Christ. And it may be that that some of these young leaders in Haiti that are kind of on fire with Community of Christ identity may have a role in helping with that. But anyway, some of that is, I would say, is for us to figure out in the future. But yeah, so they're still part of Community of Christ. That's for sure.
We lost a good minister when we lost Jean-Michel Rosset.
We sure did. Yeah.
And he's, I just question the 20,000 members. Does that include those that are in the restored church now, as they call it?
No. So that would be just kind of an estimate, because our Shelby figures, you know, in Canada East, you can go into Shelby and you can pretty much know exactly what the membership of Canada East Mission Center is. Now, the active membership will be less than the membership that shows up on the list in Shelby, of course. In Haiti, it's kind of the other way around. So the active membership will be more than what we actually have in Shelby, and Shelby is not very up to date for the church in Haiti. 20,000 is a rough guess, but yeah, and it would be less now than certainly what it would have been before the division that I talked about. So I think I saw another. Yeah, Susan was waving.
At the moment, is the pandemic affecting the churches, the worship, and the schools in Haiti at this moment?
Yes. Yeah, so the pandemic has certainly had an impact on Haiti. So I was in Haiti in March. So I was there in fact, we had a big event in March and in Ange. I went down there kind of just as things were starting. It was starting to become clear that this was going to be a big deal, but especially where I live in the United States, I don't know, I think you guys might have been a little bit ahead of us, but it was a little slow to sink in just how serious this was going to affect us. And I was up late the night before I left, as you know, suddenly I had people saying, "Are you crazy? You can't go there right now," you know. And anyway, we ended up going anyway, and we had our event the last Sunday. Actually, one of the best public health speeches that I've heard during the pandemic was from the Haitian public health officer who came and spoke to our event there in Haiti, and was kind of cautioning people about all the best practices in terms of hand washing and social distancing and mask wearing and all these kinds of things. And I left Haiti on the 9th of March, and it was the 21st of March, I think, that then they went into kind of a total shutdown, similar to what a lot of places did. They closed the schools, closed government offices, and had curfews and stay-at-home orders and that kind of thing. That has now, so they were shut down like that. They gradually started to reopen some things, and here just in the last few weeks, churches have officially been allowed to go back to worshiping with social distancing, with mask wearing. So it has had certainly a big impact on Haiti. Initially, a lot of the factories closed down, and that meant that a lot of people were thrown out of work. It's been a real challenge for folks there. And the churches ended up trying to take on a real leadership role in terms of encouraging the best practices, social distancing, hand washing, mask wearing. A lot of people, Lanier Lefort, one of my video blogs that I did, kind of reported on the situation with the pandemic in Haiti. And Lanier, of course, was telling us how he was on the radio every few days trying to represent a good, responsible voice and encouraging people to take the necessary precautions. And I think it's really made a difference. So in the cities, you really see people wearing masks and trying to do their best. It's a little bit hard to know how many, so if you ask about caseloads and the kind of the standard COVID-19 statistics I don't know how meaningful they are for Haiti. So there's only one place that actually does testing, and that's in Port-au-Prince. You can get a swab done in some other places and send that to Port-au-Prince, and they can process that. But yeah, their numbers of cases have not shown up as being particularly high, but it's just a little uncertain. So anyway, it's certainly had an impact in Haiti. Schools are now back operating, and they're trying to kind of get back somewhat to normal. But I guess we're all praying and hoping that things continue to go okay. Yeah, David.
So whenever I see pictures or videos or any content of our brothers and sisters in Haiti, or for that matter, in any of, I don't know what the correct term is, but the developing world, third world nations, countries in Africa and so forth, wherever our church members are, I'm always super struck with how much passion that they have, which seems to have depleted somewhat, and I'm not speaking just about Community of Christ, but Christianity in general throughout North America and Europe and Australia and other first world nations. And so my question is, for them, that deep passion that they have, that love that they have for church, where does that flow from?
Well, I don't know is probably the safest answer. But so from my first trip out of the U.S. and Canada context, my very first trip to French Polynesia, I think I ran into that same kind of thing, and started asking myself that question. What do these people got, and how do we get some of it? Because it'd be great if we could bottle it and bring it back. But so. And I don't know, I have tossed around and I've read a bunch of people speaking about different kinds of explanations. I think some people would say that, we in Canada and the United States are just too wealthy and comfortable. And so our passion tends to be diminished because we don't need faith, and we don't need the religious community, or we think we don't need the religious community as much as what folks do in some places. I would say, Canada and the United States, Western Europe, maybe tend to be places that are more individualistic in terms of the cultural tendencies. And I think some of what we're seeing when you go to some of these places is it's enthusiasm, and it's also enthusiasm in community, because they are so communal, and the role of the community is so important to them that they stick together and they do things together, and it's really important to be together. And so, their faith is in Jesus Christ. Their faith is not in the social safety net and the salary and all the things that the structures that the government provides to them, because the government in some of these places does not provide them that kind of social safety net. So I think their faith tends to be a lot more focused on Christ and on the church. But so I don't know, David. I think that's kind of some of it. I know I was astonished the first time, as I started to get to know the church, not in Haiti, but in Tahiti. And I would go to all these services, and they were all held in Tahitian. And before it took me a little while to learn that most of the young people, for really more than a generation, a lot of them had grown up not learning Tahitian. And so if you can imagine, these kids, when you look at a Tahitian congregation, and I would look at it thinking, where do they get this passion? Where do they get this enthusiasm? And then you realize that all those kids, and tons of kids there, and tons of young adults, and they're all there, and there's a good chance they don't even understand the service any better than I do, because they don't speak Tahitian. And I'm like, yeah, my kids in that situation would last about 5 minutes. They'd be like, we're not going to that. Why are we going to go to this? We don't even understand what's going on, So what on earth are they even doing there? I mean, some of it is the culture being so communal, and community, and families are together, and the community is together, and then that gets lived out, in song and in their faithful exuberance. But Gary was going to offer I think Gary has the answer.
No, I don't have the answer, but I did have the opportunity to go to Haiti, and I did witness a service, and I really had to hold on to myself, because it's not the way we worship. For lack of another word, I would say we're dead. I mean, I can go to a service, it's quiet. That's better, I guess. But they are just going all the time. When I walked into the service, which is already going because they may start at 6 o'clock and go till noon, it was like an auction sale. The speaker starts out speaking, and then he gets louder and he gets louder, and they get revved up. And I think that's what he's doing. He's revving them up. I went to Montreal. I said to them that I wished I could blow the wall of the church out so Montreal could hear them sing. You don't need a choir. They are a choir, just a congregation, because they know how to sing. They know how to worship, not the way we worship. And I'm not saying one's wronger than the other, but they certainly do worship with power.
Yeah, some of it, just to be fair, and I think Gary said this too, not saying one's right and one's wrong, some of it is just cultural difference. And,
Yep.
You go into one of our services in Canada, and it can be a powerful spiritual experience, but a lot of it's going on inside you know, and if you look at someone, sometimes you can even kind of see it, you know, you can see a little bit of what's going on, maybe, but it's mostly internal. And in some of these places, the way to, you don't just keep that inside, it's expressed outwardly by dancing and by hands in the air and by volume. And so it's overwhelming. When you spend a lot of time doing it and you're not used to it, it can be really cool at first. Then it can also be kind of overwhelming, you know, and it takes a while you have to kind of get used to it. I found I've had to, you know, I used to spend a lot of time in Brazil, and going back and forth between Brazil and Honduras would be kind of my places where it's like, and after a while I would get to where, like, as much as I love it, I'd be ready just for a little more contemplative, kind of quiet worship experience. So, but yes, it's exciting, and there's some wonderful energy. I recommend, I still say Community of Christ Ange congregation has some of the best choirs in the world. And so if you go onto my YouTube channel, you can see some of them. But anyway, I don't want to be disrespectful of anyone's time, because I think we were scheduled to go to 3 my time, 4 your time. But I don't need to rush off. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to do that, but I don't want to keep you all prisoners. So was there anyone else who had a last thing they wanted to jump in with? Yes, Claire.
This whole question of same-sex marriage, did that have a major impact in Haiti?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it continues to have an impact. So, I mean, there's kind of the official answer. And if I'm in Haiti, I mean, the answer that I give is that, yes, Community of Christ's basic policy that is kind of the foundational policy around the world is that we do not ordain homosexual folks who are in a relationship, and we do not do marriages of same-sex couples. That's kind of that's our default policy. And then places that have had national conferences, there are places where that has changed. But Haiti has not, nor do we have any immediate plans to have a national conference. So from time to time, we end up in that conversation, and that's kind of the official answer. And for some people, that is satisfying. But for some people, it's not. Because for some people, they don't even want to be associated with a church, even in a roundabout way, you know, even if you say, well, yeah, not the church in Haiti, but knowing that they're related to a church somewhere else that does those things is a challenge for some people. So it's, like I say, it's an ongoing situation. It's not a big deal for some people. It's a bigger deal for other people. And yeah, I'm not exactly sure how often the question comes up with our local leaders. It comes up from time to time. And I would say it comes up from time to time in some places where there's kind of direct interaction with some folks from other churches who want to point out that there is that Community of Christ is related to churches and countries where they have those different policies. But it's interesting across Latin America to watch the evolution of those issues. And it's been, the issue is not that, well, many countries have been working through kind of changing perspectives on gay rights and issues related to sexuality and gender. And in some places, this isn't a Haiti story, but just quick, a Honduras story. When we were dealing with this in Honduras, and I was more actively involved in Honduras, we were dealing with it in the U.S. It was coming up as an issue at World Conference, and we were having a a session in Haiti with, well, we'd had a session with pastors and leaders, and then we're at a youth camp. And so at the youth camp, we were looking at resolutions that were coming up before the World Conference. And Carlos Enrique, the apostle, stands up and he's kind of tiptoeing around kind of the issue because it's a little bit awkward and it's potentially a little bit scandalous. And in Carlos Enrique's generation, very, very scandalous in Honduras, you know. But the way it played out, the best way I can describe it is it's kind of like if you've heard the old joke about the parent that sits the child down to talk to them about sex and says, you know, we should have this conversation about sex, and the kid says, oh, okay, Dad, what do you need? What do you want to know? And it was kind of like that in Honduras. You know, we got to a point where you realize that something that was extremely scandalous for a certain generation, now the kids in school are talking about this and are much more comfortable with the topic. And you know, I'm not right up to date in Honduras, so I need to kind of trail off there. But I would not be saying, you know, I wouldn't say that, oh yeah, there's that the kids in school in Honduras are very progressive on issues of homosexuality. I wouldn't go that far, but I would say that it's a topic that is spoken about a lot more, and even in fairly traditional conservative places in Latin America, there's an evolution on these issues, but it's still it's very controversial in Honduras, and people get killed, you know, for being gay, or there was someone who was basically lynched here just not too long ago. Homosexual transgender person in Haiti who was kind of an activist, you know. So it's a difficult issue. Well, thank you, everyone. I didn't get to hear from everybody. I managed to have everybody's face on my screen, so that was very nice. Nice to see you, Amy. Nice to see everybody. And I hope you at least heard something interesting or new this afternoon. I appreciate you coming and hanging out in our chat under the tree. And hello, Mary.
Very interesting, Art.
Yeah, thank you very much, Art. That was great.
Thanks, Kathy. Thank you, David.
Hearing from you.
Great to see everyone too.
Good to see everyone. Sorry for my technical problems.
No problem.
Hi to your family.
Thank you.
And stay safe, everyone.
Thanks. You take care, David.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.